Hi everybody, my name is Jessica. Thank you all for joining today. I'm excited to talk to you all about the importance of educating our youth about climate change and how local educational networks can play a role in helping to get climate change into the instruction in California public schools. As someone who was in the California public school system, I didn't actually learn about the urgency of the climate crisis until after I'd graduated and taken my first environmental studies course in college. So I've tried to reflect on this since then and imagine a world in which we learn about climate earlier and also learn about empathy for the environment early on in our academic journeys. And that's what brought me to studying climate education for my capstone project. So starting with some background and process. So one of the main reasons that I, along with many other researchers, believe climate education to be so important is this concept of intergenerational justice. Just like us, children are impacted by the climate crisis, and they have the right to know that this phenomenon exists and also find ways to engage in opportunities to mitigate its effects. This is especially the case as the worst effects of climate change are coming in the next century, so more of the lives of our youth will be spent in a climate-altered world. In addition to our generation's responsibility to stop burning greenhouse gases now, I also believe that we must also prioritize instructing future generations on how they can be prepared to deal with climate impacts. This diagram showcases on the left that we've already seen global average temperatures increase by 1.1 degrees Celsius, and on the right-hand side of the 2022 mark, we see that the worst effects of climate change are coming, so the youth born today are going to be experiencing much higher temperatures, as high as 4 degrees Celsius. And so, in other words, children born today are going to experience the impacts of climate change more than any other generations have in the past. This is a list of observed impacts to society that have occurred since the world has warmed 1.1 degrees Celsius. These impacts include impacts to our water availability and food production, our health and well-being, cities, settlements, and infrastructure impacts, and also impacts to our biodiversity and ecosystems. So these impacts will only intensify in the next century if we stay on our current emissions path. One way that communities can tackle these climate impacts is through climate education. When communities are informed about the way that climate change impacts their health and safety, addressing climate change can become more of a priority in their decision-making. Though adults are not the only community members that can participate in climate resilience efforts. Studies have also shown that youth are important agents of change, whether it's developing climate projects at their school, participating in civic engagement, or just informing their parents about what they've learned about climate change. These are all ways that youth can advance climate resilience in their communities. And I believe that a main reason that we are in the climate predicament that we are in is because of a lack of empathy for the environment and its inhabitants. So youth education can really play a key role in developing future generations of empathetic leaders that can be responsible stewards for our Earth. Students themselves are also calling for the educational system to step up to the plate. And in this quote from an 18-year-old, it says that the worst feeling is to want to do something about climate change because it affects us all and it will only get worse, but you don't have the resources and you don't know where or whom to reach out to. And that brings us to the context of California, which is the study site of my capstone project. So although the mission statement of California's Department of Education is to prepare students to thrive in the world that they step into, California has hardly made an effort to prepare its over 300,000 students for the biggest societal challenge of their time. A recent study found that only 4% of California's foundational state educational policies contain any mention of the word climate change. So this really begs the question of how can our students really thrive without understanding the problem that they're up against? Therefore, with my research, I sought to answer how can we address these gaps in K-12 climate education in California and engage students in effective climate learning. My research process was split up into 3 different steps. First, I reviewed California's climate education policy because I wanted to get an understanding of how the system works and ways in which it can be influenced. And I also wanted to take a look at what specific policies exist to get climate education into the instruction in public schools. My second process was to go through a case study analysis of a local climate education initiative here in San Diego called the UCSD-EarthLab. And I was really interested in learning what systems they utilize to have success in their program, and also what climate education content is taught. My last step was to compile a list of recommendations for other organizations who are interested in implementing climate education in their own schools. Moving on to my findings. So this diagram showcases from a very high level the decision makers in California's educational system, with each of their responsibilities listed. So there's, on the left, the California Department of Education that dictates what students should know. We have county offices of education that work as support systems for school districts. School districts themselves decide how students learn those standards, and then local stakeholders also have an opportunity to provide formal feedback to district planning. The main takeaway here is that states dictate what students need to know through state standards, but decisions on how students learn those standards is the responsibility of local educational agencies. And what I found in my research is that aside from several lessons in California's high school science standards, climate change is not a mandated topic of instruction. So most of the legislation and proposed bills that exist to date have aimed at developing climate educational resources for teachers who are looking to voluntarily implement those resources into their lesson plans. The challenge here is that without being a mandate, any resources that are being developed by the state are likely not flowing into the classroom at the scale that they need to be. But I argue that although climate change is not a mandated topic of instruction, it can be used to support the instruction of existing state standards. And because decisions of how those standards are taught at the local level, I believe there's an opportunity for bottom-up initiatives to incorporate climate change into local instructional planning. And that brings me to the case study analysis portion of my project, where I analyzed the UCSD-EarthLab because I think it's an amazing example of how a local initiative engages K-12 students in climate learning. So the EarthLab serves 9 different schools in the San Diego Unified School District, and most of the instruction occurs here at this 4-acre outdoor climate action park. And it's called the Climate Action Park because it has different kind of sections for climate-based learning, and so you can learn about food systems, water conservation, and also clean energy. And it's important to note that the EarthLab is situated in the climate justice community of Encanto, and this community has a very high vulnerability to climate change because of climate equity failures in the city of San Diego. And climate equity is addressing historical inequities suffered by people of color, allowing everyone to fairly share the same benefits and burdens of climate solutions and attain full and equal access to opportunities regardless of one's background and identity. So the EarthLab really tackles these localized climate inequities head-on, and next we'll talk about how they do it. So in my research, I found that the organizations that make up the EarthLab network all play an indispensable role in the success of its program. The EarthLab's partners include a community-based organization, a research institution, and the school sites themselves. So the community-based organization is called Groundwork Choyas Creek, and they are a climate organization that works to bring climate projects into the community, and it serves Encanto and other surrounding neighborhoods as well. And their role at the EarthLab is really to lead the instruction, lead the planning and the mission. So they are supported as well by the research institution of UCSD's Center on Global Justice, and UCSD really supports in curriculum design, research and development, and also they train undergrad interns to go out on site and support with the instruction there. And then the last partner of the EarthLab is the school sites themselves. So administrators and the teachers there really see EarthLab as an asset to their school. And so they're really supportive in terms of resourcing and outreach to get more students interested in participating. But I argue that these partnerships are only as effective as they are because they're built on the foundation of trust, collaboration, and community. So first, because the work is led by a community-based organization, there's pre-existing trust between Groundwork and the schools. So the schools really know that the EarthLab is there to serve their students and to achieve academic success for their students. So they really want to see it succeed. There's also collaboration between the stakeholders, which is really important because it allows for capacity building and knowledge sharing between educators, so more people can feel comfortable teaching about the topic of climate change and more students can learn about it. And lastly, being community-driven allows for these topics and problems to be contextually relevant and engaging for all the students, since they're tackling the problems that they experience on a day-to-day basis in their communities. I also sought to explore the instructional content at the EarthLab. So in my literature review, 3 concepts emerged as being integral to teaching about climate change. And in my analysis, all 3 of these concepts emerged in EarthLab's work. So the first concept is that climate change education must address climate justice. For EarthLab students to get a holistic understanding of the climate crisis, they are taught about the inequitable impacts that climate change has on vulnerable populations. For example, lesson plans for middle schoolers included a history of their own community in southeastern San Diego, where they learned about segregated housing policies in the 40s and 50s, and how that has resulted in long-term government disinvestment in their neighborhoods. And so now, with extreme heat events and flooding, they're seeing more disruption in their neighborhoods compared to other parts of San Diego. The next concept is action-oriented learning, where students should feel like they have the knowledge and tools to participate in climate solutions. I found that there are many opportunities for the students at the EarthLab to apply the knowledge that they've learned to actual community planning. For example, those same students that are learning about climate justice then have the opportunity to go on a field visit of their community to collect data on climate infrastructure that's being sent to a report that might get to a council member to advocate for more climate projects in their community. And lastly is this concept of interdisciplinary content, and it emerged in all of the lesson plans that I analyzed, and it was clear that since climate change includes information from the fields such as math, science, politics, and economics, the instructors there really cultivate the skills and knowledge from a multitude of fields. So they're really getting that holistic learning experience. So moving on to my recommendations and conclusion. So first, I believe, or further recommendations for others who are interested in building these partnerships and education initiatives in their own schools, I believe that the partnerships that are built at the EarthLab are an enabling condition to advocate for climate education at the local school district and beyond. Second, I recommend that instructional content should be justice-centered, action-oriented, and interdisciplinary to effectively prepare students with the skills and tools necessary to address the climate crisis. Students can be decision makers in their schools and communities now, but they'll also be our future decision makers, voters, and policymakers. So these next generations can really be the ones that get us out of this mess if we can prepare them effectively. Thirdly, climate change instructional standards should continue to be fought for at the state level because top-down and bottom-up efforts can support each other to accelerate the expansion of climate learning in the state. If climate change is incorporated into standards, community-based climate justice organization can lead that instruction as they have the localized climate knowledge. And lastly, although California is a leader in the clean energy transition, as I've expressed today, its educational system is not pulling its weight. So the state and local governments should leverage youth education networks as a tool to meet their climate action plans and goals. And in conclusion, given the decentralization of California's educational system, community-based organizations can really play a key role in expanding climate learning in the state. And that's all I got. Thank you all for listening. Yes, Yash.
Firstly, that was a really cool and impressive presentation, and I think it's a really important topic. But along the lines of what Eliza spoke about, is there a way that these students can be taught about the reality of climate change without instilling a fear or helplessness in them?
Yeah, so the EarthLab does a really amazing job at incorporating the social and emotional aspects of learning about climate change. So they actually have an entire curriculum and elective at one of the schools that they work with, which is called the Restorative Climate Justice Curriculum, I believe. And with that, they teach the basics of climate change, the impacts of climate change, but they also make sure to provide certain breaks in the instruction where students can come together and really discuss the feelings that have occurred when learning about such a daunting topic like climate change. So yeah, they really bring in that aspect, and that was also really reflected in the literature as well as being a necessary component to learn about, you know, the world is burning, so we have to learn about ways to get there in mentally appropriate ways. Yeah.
I'm curious if at the EarthLab, I guess this would fall under the social justice umbrella. Like, is there any organization that is also addressing how capitalism affects climate change and how, like, our consumer culture is also destroying the world?
Yes. So I did notice at the EarthLab that it's doesn't necessarily fall into just individualistic solutions, which I think a little bit addresses your point, because a lot of the times solutions to climate change are like, you know, just do this at your home, which are all important ways of changing behavior. But because they focus on the collective and changing policies and systems, I think that's really an impressive tool to fight against systems like capitalism, which are majorly responsible for our climate crisis. So, yes. Thanks.
Really great project, Jessica. So question for you. I mean, EarthLab is such an exemplar, right? And it's, you know, the folks that have gotten this up and running have invested so much time into it. And I'm wondering, as part of your research, were there other examples across the county, right? Maybe not quite at the scale of EarthLab, but where there's like synergies, right, across San Diego County. Did you come across any other examples?
I can't, not specifically in San Diego, well, I'll take a step back. Not specifically with EarthLab, like a site-specific event, but I did get to talk to a lot of different stakeholders that are looking to push climate education with youth in San Diego. And there are different organizations that work with teachers. Actually, here at UCSD, there's a climate learning event that happens every month where teachers K through 12 can come and learn from different scientists at UCSD about their research and how to implement that into the classroom and specific to climate change. So, and then at the state level, there's also these systems that are working to change credentialing or add to credentialing programs for pre-service teachers. So there's a whole organization that's working with California State University and the UC system to implement that. So there are other examples of ways in which this is supported, but I didn't really look at other site-specific climate education programs.
What do you see as the role of the parents in this process of educating children and getting them up to speed on what they're facing?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I think at the EarthLab I can speak to specifically, so there is, this space is meant for intergenerational knowledge sharing. So they actually have opportunities where the students who are learning about these phenomenon and learning about climate and the environment can work and speak to their parents and present to them about what they've learned and the importance of it. And then there's also monthly, I think, climate learning spaces for the adults in the community, which also include people like the parents. So yeah, I think that it's just this knowledge sharing between multiple generations can really create this culture of climate-motivated individuals in the community. So, yeah. All right.